Well, howdy again everyone, and today I'm taking a look at a bit of a historic lens, the first ever EF mount autofocus Canon L lens. It's the EF 100-300mm f5.6 L. It came out all the way back in 1987, just a few months after Canon changed to their new EF lens system, which we all know and love today. It's a lens that's long discontinued now, but they're still popular on eBay, and they can be found these days for about £175 or $200 US. Sounds like a lot for such an old piece of kit, but on the other hand, its optics seem to have a good reputation, and if you really want an L lens, then that's the cheapest you'll ever get one, by a long way. The 100-300mm focal length was popular before manufacturers started making 70-300mm lenses, and it means that this lens is pure telephoto, whether you're using a full frame or APS-C camera. Compared to modern telephoto zoom lenses, this one has a couple of issues. Firstly, it came out long before image stabilization became a common feature, so for handheld photography, you might need to use quite high ISO levels on your camera to get sharp pictures, unless you're shooting in the daylight. Secondly, at its widest angles, the lens's aperture can only manage f5.6, so it's a slightly dark lens throughout its whole zoom range. It's not a great piece of kit for getting out of focus backgrounds, unless you're zoomed right in. So, compared to a more modern telephoto zoom lens, this older L lens will be a bit harder to use, although really, all you need to do is get those shutter speeds up and you won't have a problem. Let's take a look at this lens's build quality. The lens is based on a metal lens mount and made of good quality plastics, but that's the end of the good news, really. It uses an old-fashioned push-pull zoom mechanism. Now, in my copy of the lens, it was a little stiff and not very smooth to use, so getting the exact focal length you need isn't exactly an easy experience. But it wasn't quite stiff enough not to fall under its own weight when used at 300mm, disappointingly, so it's a bit of a double fail there. The lens's focus system is also quite antiquated, but in fairness, it does work. When set to manual focus, the focus ring feels very scratchy to turn without any damping. However, it does turn incredibly precisely over 360 degrees, the longest travel I think I've ever seen on a focus ring. As the lens changes focus, the front element extends and turns around. Again, an annoying trait in older lenses which will be a serious pain for anyone using polarizing or graduated filters. But when you set the lens to autofocus, the focus ring does at least disconnect from the motor, so you can safely spin it around without damaging the mechanism. The autofocus motor is a bit slow and noisy. Actually, it's not that the autofocus motor is slow, it's more that the travel of the mechanism is so long that it just takes a while to get through it all. But a happier result of that precise mechanism is that this lens has no problem focusing accurately. In all my testing, it hit focus every time. The only exception to that was when I tried to use it on my little Canon EOS M3, where it struggled a bit when zoomed in to 300mm. The lens doesn't have any extra weather sealing. The front element of the lens is edged in rubber, interestingly. Presumably that's to stop the whole thing cracking open if it makes contact with a hard surface. But that rubber ring gets in the way of the filter thread a bit, making filter usage pretty tricky, as you can see here. So combined with the twisting focus mechanism, this is a pretty filter unfriendly lens. So overall, it's clear that 30 years ago, being a Canon L lens did not necessarily entail having great build quality. So let's see about image quality then. Firstly, on a full frame camera, a 20 megapixel Canon 6D. Sadly, this is one of the few old lenses that Canon do not publish correction profiles for. So these are images without peripheral illumination or chromatic aberration correction. Also, in its old age, my copy of this lens had a faulty aperture mechanism which was stuck open at f5.6, so I can only give you results at f5.6. But the good news is that, even on a modern camera, the lens is fantastically sharp with very little colour fringing, and it also has good contrast. From 100mm in the middle of the image and into the corners, to 200mm, and finally all the way into 300mm, the lens is fantastically sharp from start to finish, giving lovely, punchy images. At f8, I imagine the image would probably be even sharper. So, on a full-frame camera, the lens still has what it takes. Let's see about the more challenging ground of an APS-C camera then, my 24MP Canon EOS M3. At 100mm, sharpness and contrast remain excellent in the middle of the image and very good in the corners. At 200mm, still very good indeed, with little colour fringing. At 300mm, it's just a touch softer, with slightly more noticeable chromatic aberration, but still at this long focal length, it's a really good performance for such an old lens. So it's clear that whatever issues it might have with build quality, the 100 to 300mm f5.6L still has fantastic optics. That red ring still meant the same 30 years ago, even before the advent of high-resolution digital SLR cameras. Okay, let's look at distortion and vignetting. It's a good enough performance. Negligible distortion at 100mm and almost no vignetting, but do bear in mind this is at f5.6, a slightly dark aperture. At 200mm we see slight pincushion distortion and slight darkness in the corners. At 300mm, again a bit more distortion and vignetting. It's a shame I couldn't brighten those corners by stopping down the lens or using peripheral illumination, but with the right editing software, I'm sure you could take care of everything. The lens can focus as closely as 1.5 meters, about average for this kind of lens, although some newer telephoto zoom lenses can get closer. Anyway, even at close distances, image quality remains nice and punchy. How does this lens perform against bright light? Like other older lenses, very poorly, as you can see, with plenty of flaring and a big loss of contrast. Finally, bokeh. With its maximum aperture of f5.6, you won't be getting strongly out of focus backgrounds here, but actually the quality of those backgrounds is a strong point of the lens. Even complex backgrounds are rendered nice and smoothly in all situations. Nice. So overall, the Canon 100 to 300mm f5.6L is a tricky lens to use with its dark aperture and lack of image stabilization and out-of-date build quality. But those who are willing to tame the beast will be rewarded with exceptional image quality, sharp, punchy pictures on full-frame or APS-C cameras with very nice quality bokeh. It's more than able to compete against, and perhaps even overcome, the image quality of a lot of modern telephoto zoom lenses. So should you get onto eBay right now and look for one? The current prices are good value for what the lens can do, but also you'd find it much easier to use an image stabilized 70 to 300mm lens instead. And 29-year-old lenses on eBay can obviously have some mechanical issues, like this one did with its aperture control. As always, it's up to you and your needs as a photographer. Personally, I've had lots of fun with this historic L lens so far because of the lovely results it yields, so from me, it comes recommended.